short years. We're very focused in on the minutia of what our kids are doing in this moment and that moment. And there's very little of the sitting back and reflecting in a large-scale way on how did we do as parents? Did we equip our kids to move into the world as independent, happy adults? I don't think at that level. I do sometimes talk with parents who have older kids because I'm always trying to figure out what really matters. And so then into our stack of letters pops this letter that was kind of sad and tough to read because it's a dad who is really asking that question, not with a lot of clarity, but a dad of an older child who is saying, I don't know how I did.
And in fact, doubting how he did.
Right. Let me read this letter. Dear Sugars, I dropped my son off at college yesterday and I can't stop crying. He is the oldest of my 2 sons, and their mom and I split up when he was 7. I tried to be a good parent, and I know sometimes I did it well, but it's so hard to do alone. All the shopping, cooking, laundry, and driving, not to mention trying to help them navigate through life when there's no other parent to consult with. I get that parenting is tough, but what makes me feel so full of grief and guilt is how much time and energy I've put into myself. I have so often felt so fucking lonely. So I have dated, fallen in love, and fallen apart when things went bad. So many nights they were content to watch TV, and I let them, instead of doing something useful, so I could be looking through OkCupid or emailing some woman. I never asked my boys to spend a lot of time with a girlfriend's kids, never asked anyone to live with me, and even ended a couple of relationships with women whose kids my sons and I didn't really like. And parents have a right to be happy too. But I could have waited. Here I am, single still, so what was the rush? What if I had focused more on them and their needs? Not in an unhealthy, obsessive way, but in a way that always, every day, made them feel completely loved and supported. Instead, I so often obsessed over my own feelings, as maybe I'm doing right now, that I wasn't fully present in the time I had with them. I wasted so many opportunities to connect, talk, share some small piece of advice, and I focused way too much on dishes left undone, bedrooms left unclean, shoes left in piles by the door. One of my proudest parenting moments was when my son was in 3rd grade and told me right before a soccer game that he didn't want to play. I thought about giving him that talk we give about responsibility and what it means to be a teammate, but I didn't. I just said, okay, let's go home. And I took him by the hand and we walked back to our house. Sugars, I wish I had 10,000 stories like that. Instead, I look at the pictures I took of my son in his dorm room and I feel so scared that he's not ready for this big world. And whether or not it makes any sense, I blame myself. What am I supposed to do with all these feelings? Signed, Sad Dad.
Ugh, sad dad. I want to give you a hug. I really feel so just clear and sure about what I want to say to you in response to these words. And that is, you are a great dad. You're a great dad. You are right now in an incredibly emotional moment. Your first son has just left for college. And you are having that feeling that I think every parent has, where you think, oh, did I really have to worry about the piles of shoes?
Right.
You know, frankly, Sad Dad, I do this on an almost nightly basis.
Oh, my
okay?
God.
So
yeah.
I know exactly this guilt you speak of. I really do. And I feel it on a kind of more mundane, small-scale, daily way. Oh, I shouldn't have snapped at my daughter when she did this, and I shouldn't have done that, and I should have done this. And you're feeling it on the grand scale because you're in this big moment.
Right.
You just said goodbye to your son. He's launching off to college. So I just want to say all of this guilt you're feeling, I think it's really just you being pretty emotional about this moment you're in your life.
Yeah.
And you have this idealized view of like the father you should have been.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact of the matter is none of us can be that father. None of us can be that mother.
Yeah.
Okay, because that is not reality. It doesn't encompass, as you say, all of the things that you needed to do for yourself and also just all of the mundane tasks of life.
Right.
I also want to say that it's not over.
Right.
What's your son? 17, 18, maybe 19, okay?
Right.
He still needs you. He's a teenager. He needs you. If you want more of those moments that you describe in your fathering life,
Right.
there are the years ahead. And I mean, we have letters from so many people whose fathers completely messed up those first
Right.
18 years.
That's-
People who
yeah.
don't even know their fathers.
We're
and
actually
they
not
can
a,
make
we're not a good
amends.
relative scale of the
Well,
letters
no,
we
what
get.
I mean is if you really genuinely do have regrets,
Right.
that it's not too late. And we have fathers and mothers who have actually made amends over like actual things that they should feel guilty about.
Mm-hmm.
So please, please, please rest your heart here, rest your worry.
It's so interesting, Cheryl. I mean, I identified very deeply with this letter, and I thought, I fail a lot of the time to be worried about the right stuff. I am lost in self-consumption at times that I should be focused on them. I worry too much about dumb stuff that I'm going to look back and really kick myself for worrying about. There's something maybe, I don't know if it is particular to the male psyche, but there's a part of me that responds to this idea of he's holding himself to account. And he's going to be unblinking about saying, there were moments where I could have been a better dad. And now that my son is lost to me, to the world, he isn't really, but that's how it feels, right? When kids go off, especially to college, he's having this reckoning of saying, I wasted so many opportunities to connect and talk. And he's wrong to beat himself up for it, but everybody could do it better.
Mm-hmm.
So one thing that I love about this letter, even though it's a sad, tough letter to read, is it's a letter from a dad, and it's a letter from a dad with this unique kind of struggle of being a single dad and being deeply thoughtful about how he's doing as a dad, and also in some ways very isolated. And as I was reading it, I was thinking about this amazing writer, Brad Watson, who I met in Boston, 10 years ago or so. And he had his life as an author. He's the author of these two amazing story collections, Aliens in the Prime of Their Lives and The Last Days of the Dogman, and the novel Heaven of Mercury, which I love. It was a finalist for the National Book Award. It's one of my favorite novels in the world. So I met Brad as a writer and only came to realize as I got to know him a little better, he's got a son, who he visits, and that he had this much more complicated life as a parent in the exact way that Sad Dad is writing about, kind of having to do it on his own. And when we talked even briefly about his role as a dad, he was so thoughtful about it, I figured we should give him a call.
Hello.
Hey, Brad.
Hey, Steve.
Yeah, it's Steve Almond. I'm here with Cheryl Strayed.
Hi, Brad.
Hi, Cheryl.
We've been discussing this letter from Sad Dad. Did you have a chance to read it?
Oh, yeah, I've been reading it again, and, it's a sad letter, that's for sure.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about your own experiences as a dad and, then what you made of the letter?
I really feel for this guy, and I know what he's going through. And I've actually been divorced twice, both times with children, and both times painful divorces. And I was never the custody parent, although I always kept up regular visitation, which was easy in my first marriage because I lived nearby. The second time was harder because I had taken a job across country, and I found myself then doing a lot of cross-country travel, by airline, and every 3 weeks at first when my son was, say, 9 or 10, and I did that for a while, and then when he got a little older, maybe once a month, and a little older, maybe every 6 weeks when he was in his teens, and he got busier, and, I thought, well, I don't need to be there as much.
How old are your sons now? You have two, is that right?
I have two. One was born of my teenage marriage. He's 42. And I was so traumatized by that, I didn't marry again for almost 20 years, thinking, well, this is going to work. And then that one didn't work either, which was, in a way, it was harder because I was older.
Right. That son is in his 20s now?
He's just turned 22.
Okay.
When that one broke up and my son was 9 or 10 years old, it was heartbreaking. I missed him so much.
Mm-hmm. This Sad Dad in his letter, he has so much guilt and regret.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you can speak to that. I mean, before you got on the phone, Steve and I both agreed that essentially to be a parent is to feel guilty and to have regret and to think, well, why didn't I do this when I should have been this way or that way? And I'm just curious about what your experience with those feelings has been as a father.
Well, it took me, I think, about 10 years, to tell you the truth, to stop feeling awful the first time, even though it was easier than the second time. I still feel sad quite a lot. It just sort of descends upon me. Anytime during the day, I can just suddenly start feeling sad about how things didn't work out, and I felt a kind of grief over it. I think, that this sadness you feel is very much akin to grief. It's a kind of grief. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I still feel it, even though Owen's growing up. My younger son, who's 22, and he's an honorable young man. He's always been a sweet guy. He's doing well, but he had a hard time. He had some hard years, and I felt terrible, about that, and I still do, even though he's coming through it and seems to be doing well. It's going to be a while, I think, before I'm able to let those feelings go. It's probably going to take until I really know he's entirely okay. He's out there. But like Sad Dad says, he's not. I fear he's not ready for this big fucking world. And how long am I going to go on worrying about that? I don't know. They say these days that we don't stop parenting until they're 30, and maybe that's true.
You have a son who's 42. Have you
right.
ever stopped parenting, or does it shift as they get older in your experience?
The wonderful thing is that, and I guess this is one thing I can say that maybe I hope will help Sad Dad feel a little better, is that when they grow up, at a certain point, you become adult friends with these children. You're able to hang out with them as adults, and you can talk on the adult level, and you can talk about the past. And what's been so wonderful for me is that he's forgiven me for everything, and he actually says he never felt badly about me. I mean, I know when he was right after our divorce, he used to cry and wish that we would get back together, and that wasn't so great. But before long, he adjusted, and then when he grew up and got older, I mean, we're best friends now.
Wow.
I can see this happening with Owen, my younger son. He's forgiven me too. I think it's just that if I've done anything right, I've tried to let him know and tell him and show him that I love them, even though I screwed up. And they have the biggest hearts in the world. They've forgiven me for that. I know they love me. They tell me they love me.
That's so powerful.
It's incredibly powerful.
Brad, did you feel when you were reading the letter from Sad Dad, he talks about this missing so many opportunities to connect and talk and share, and I focused too much on these small things and should have been thinking about large things. Did you suffer the same kind of anxieties? Even though you weren't the parent of custody, did you have that feeling of I was focused on the little petty stuff rather than the big stuff?
Well, even when I was doing my visits to Owen, whether he was in California or in Alabama, and here I am in Wyoming, it's difficult to know what to do with a child when you're stuck in a motel room.
Yeah.
And you want to be as much of a parent as you can, but it's hard to be creative and do things that you think are substantial or worthwhile or really making the most of the time. And so that was my experience, And as soon as I would get home, I would feel guilty, and as soon as I would get home, I would miss him.
Yeah.
And so, yeah. And then when Owen became college age, he decided he wanted to come out here to go to school, and I was elated. I thought, finally, be around my son all the time, and then I found myself being the what I think I call proximity parent, the parent who was there every day, and it was this big reversal, and I had to be the one to try to teach. I had to be the one to try to gently discipline. I had to be the one to take care of the day-to-day problems.
The heavy, yeah.
Right, not to mention the laundry.
Right.
Not to mention the laundry, yeah. As someone else said, they're teenagers until they're 30 now these days, too.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I think one of the things that you really touched upon, I think it's something that all parents feel. You experience this sense of you're in a motel room, or there's this idea that you have probably before you visited him that it would be like this sort of exalted, every moment meaningful and beautiful experience, and then it's very mundane. And we see this also in Sad Dad's letter, and he was, it sounds like, more of the sort of day in and day out parent. He wished that he had not focused so much on the dishes left undone and the bedrooms left unclean and so forth. But I maintain that is really what parenting is that, we have those high moments where you have that wonderfully meaningful exchange with your child and you feel like a torch is being passed or that you're in some ways rising to some grand moment. But a lot of, from my experience as a mother is just simply that thing that you expressed so beautifully, Brad, that your children have always known that you love them, even if that love was complicated by circumstances. And for that reason, you gave them a gift that a lot of parents, and a lot of fathers, especially who aren't the custodial fathers, they aren't able to give that to their kids.
You do realize at a point just how important it is. And, maybe in a way you're lucky. I mean, I've had friends say to me, you probably had more good one-on-one time with your son than a lot of dads who are there every day have, because when you're together, it's intensified, and you're trying hard to do those things. It's hard to hear, and it's hard to really take that into your heart and feel it. Guilt. I'm pretty hardwired for guilt and sadness anyway. And
sound like a writer, right?
Yeah, I know. So I would hear it and I would say, I hope that's true, but it kind of seems like maybe it is.
Yeah.
That both of my sons, when they reached this age, Owen is reaching now, began to reach out to me, to let me know that they love me, and I think, well, I don't know if I feel like I deserve that, but it sure is great.
It's an important point because Sad Dad, he knows in his heart that he's been a good dad in some moments. And he also, by the way, as Brad pointed out, was trying to do two things at once, right? Trying to create those memorable interactions and those moments where love is open and consecrated and expressed, or connection or guidance. And then there's everything else. And the problem is, as a parent, you generally speaking, can't partition those two. And I think you're right, Brad. We skipped right over the idea that, at least by his description, Sad Dad was doing at least a lot on his own. So it's not that the situation he was in was impossible, but I think sometimes we fail to recognize that our lives are quite complicated and difficult. And sometimes kids recognize that even if we don't. Owen clearly recognized that it was pretty tough for you to make the kind of time and space to spend with him, even if it was in a motel room, that you were doing that, every single month for years and years to keep that connection alive. And even if it felt insufficient to you, he clearly recognized how meaningful and profound an expression of love it was.
They absorb so much more than you give them credit for, even if you know that on some level that they're doing that. And of course, you have to do those mundane things. I think that parents who are divorced, whether they're the custody parent or not, feel this pressure, to be super parent. Yeah. That they have to make up for the fact that they weren't able to keep their marriage together. They weren't able to keep the sort of so-called, perfect family intact for the kids. You're sort of lashing yourself all the time that you can't be extraordinary.
In addition to being, I love that, the proximity parent, the custodial parent, he mentions kind of sideways, but it's in there, also feeling this competing desire to find a romantic love, to rekindle that part of his life and the way in which it competed with his effort to be a good dad. Do you also struggle with that, Brad? Is that something that you had to balance as well?
Well, I've remarried since, so I'm not chasing stuff anymore.
That's a euphemism.
But I don't think that Sad Dad should feel guilty about that. I mean, like as he said, you parents have a right to be happy too, and that's true. And I don't think anyone who's obviously as caring as he is going to do it to the detriment of his children's well-being or even happiness. I can tell that from the letter.
Mm-hmm.
And we all, if we love our kids, we're going to be able to somehow. It gets a little frantic, but we're going to be. You can juggle the love life with your lover and the love life you have with your kids, and you're going to drop the ball sometimes.
Right.
Sometimes with your kids, but as long as you keep telling them you love them and showing them that, even if you're sometimes a jerk, they're smarter than we think. Really, they're so wise.
Yeah, they're smarter and they're more forgiving probably than we are of ourselves.
They just want you to love them, and they want to be able to love you really. And that's the security that they want and need, and it turns out the security that we need too.
Mm-hmm.
Mm. Brad, thank you so much for spending a little time with us today.
I enjoyed it. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Brad. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
It's not time.
Last Seen, a new podcast from WBUR and the Boston Globe, investigates the largest unsolved art heist in history.
So about the time that he begins putting the duct tape on, he says, "This is a robbery."
The theft of $500 million worth of art from the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum in Boston.
When the FBI says, we solved it, we know who did it, it's like, no, you don't, because you don't have the paintings.
Subscribe and listen to Last Seen now on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts.
Sponsored by Samuel Adams and ADT Smart Home.
I'm Michelle Goldberg.
I'm Ross Douthat.
And I'm David Leonhardt. We're the hosts of The Argument, a new podcast from the New York Times opinion section. These days, it's more important than ever to listen to people who disagree with you. Maybe they'll teach you something new, or maybe they'll just teach you how to beat them. So listen to The Argument from the New York Times. Subscribe on Apple Podcasts or wherever you like to listen.
Love that guy.
Yeah, he's great. And everything he says is true. What we were talking about before we even called him, this man, sad dad, he loves his sons. And that love is ongoing.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't fail them by worrying about doing the dishes. That doesn't mean that he shouldn't use this time as a time of reflecting upon what kind of father he's been and how he's fallen short of some of his own ideas about who he wants to be to his sons. And I mean, we can always shift course a bit.
Yeah.
And I think that Brad brought that point home that, this is an ongoing relationship. His sons love him and will forgive those mistakes.
Yeah. It's so interesting, Cheryl. You said right at the top that this is a guy who misses his son.
Mm-hmm.
And the more I read the letter, the more I thought, oh, he's in love with his son and he's missing his son. And even the fantasy that he was a bad parent, the belief is in a way the expression of a wish to do it again, to be able to be a dad again and do it better this next time. And the memory that he has, that sort of shining, beautiful moment that comes back to him, you wish he has 10,000 more of them. What does that consist of? He tells his son, okay, you don't have to go out into the field of battle. Let's go home. And I took him by the hand and we walked back to our house. That's what he wants. And, of course he wants that because he's a loving dad and he sees this son who he loves moving off into the world. I hope Brad, though, got across the truth that he's still your son. And now he can, as a young adult and then eventually an adult, forgive you and let you know that you were there in ways that you didn't always experience within yourself, and that you were loving, and they see everything that you try to do. We see all the things we don't do or we do wrong. I think the blessing of kids is that often enough, they see what we are trying to do, and they love us for it.
That's right. Absolutely. Amen.
Amen.